You're not the woman in this portrait. Who are you? I'm the daughter they called ugly.
They gave me the strongest woman I've ever known.
Dust choked the Laramie train platform as the Union Pacific locomotive hissed to a halt. Abigail clutched a battered carpetbag, her heart pounding relentlessly against her ribs. She was the punchline of a cruel family joke, a substituted bride sent to a stranger. But the towering man waiting wasn't laughing. In the spring of 1884, Street Joseph, Missouri, was a bustling jumping-off point for pioneers seeking fortune in the West. But for 24-year-old Abigail Higgins, it was a prison of domestic servitude. Abigail was the eldest daughter of Josiah Higgins, a hardware merchant whose ambition far exceeded his business acumen. When Josiah's first wife passed away, he married Martha, a woman whose vanity was only matched by her cruelty. Soon after, Martha gave birth to Clara. Clara was the golden child, petite, blonde, and possessing the kind of flawless porcelain beauty that turned heads on every cobblestone street. Abigail, by contrast, was considered the tragedy of the Higgins household. Standing at 5 feet 9 inches, she was taller than most men in town, with broad shoulders built for labor rather than delicate parlor dances. Worse, in the eyes of polite society, a prominent, wine-colored birthmark swept across her left cheek and jaw. While Clara attended finishing classes and social mixers, Abigail was kept in the back of the house, scrubbing floors, balancing her father's failing ledgers, and hauling water. She was the ugly daughter, a title her stepmother never let her forget. The family's already precarious finances took a disastrous turn when Josiah's hardware store faced bankruptcy. Desperate for capital, Martha turned her sights to the matrimonial advertisements in the street. Joseph Gazette. Wanted. A wife of good moral character and sturdy constitution. I am a man of considerable means, operating a cattle ranch in the Wyoming territory. I require a partner, not a delicate flower. Travel expenses and a dowry of $300 will be wired to the right woman upon agreement. Harlan Cole, Whispering Pines Ranch, Laramie. $300 in 1884 was a small fortune. Martha immediately decided that Clara would be the one to secure it. However, Clara had no intention of actually marrying a rough-hewn cowboy in the middle of nowhere. She had recently caught the eye of the local Buchanan County bank manager's son and was determined to stay in Missouri. We will simply write to him. Martha conspired with Clara in the parlor, loud enough for Abigail to hear from the kitchen. We'll send him your miniature portrait. Secure the wire transfer, and then send him a letter saying you fell ill. By the time he realizes he's been duped, the money will be spent on your local dowry. The correspondence began. However, Clara despised writing and lacked the intellect to craft the kind of letters a lonely, practical rancher would appreciate. The task of writing the letters fell to Abigail. Night after night, by the flickering light of a single oil lamp, Abigail poured her soul into the ink. When Harlan wrote of the vast, unforgiving Wyoming plains and his dream of building a legacy, Abigail wrote back about the dignity of hard work and the desire for a life built on mutual respect and shared burdens. Harlan Cole fell in love with the mind behind the letters. He wired the $300 to the Buchanan County Bank without hesitation. The money arrived on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, Martha's plan changed. Harlan had sent a telegram demanding his bride be on the Friday train, or he would contact the Pinkerton National Detective Agency to investigate the wire fraud. Panic set in. Martha could not send Clara, and she could not return the money as she had already used it to pay off Josiah's most pressing debts. It was then that Martha's eyes landed on Abigail, who was hauling a heavy sack of flour into the pantry. A wicked, mocking smile spread across the stepmother's face. He paid for a Higgins bride, Martha sneered to her husband later that evening, and he shall have one. Let him have the ugly one. It will be the greatest joke ever played. A wealthy cattle baron expecting an angel, and instead, a scarred workhorse steps off the train. By the time he figures it out, the train will be gone, and we will be free of her. They ambushed Abigail that night. She was given an ultimatum: get on the train to Laramie, or be thrown out into the streets of St. Joseph with nothing but the clothes on her back. Martha handed her a meager $20 for food and thrust a cheap, second-hand wool dress into her arms. Don't flatter yourself into thinking he'll keep you. Clara laughed maliciously, twirling a lock of blonde hair. When he sees your face, he'll likely throw you in the pigpen where you belong. But you will buy us the time we need. Abigail didn't cry. She had stopped crying over her family's cruelty years ago. Instead, she packed her threadbare carpet bag with a quiet, steely resolve. She knew she was being used as a pawn in a cruel, humiliating joke. She knew the man waiting at the end of the line would be furious. But as she boarded the Union Pacific train, staring out the window as the green hills of Missouri faded into the dusty plains of the West, a strange sense of liberation washed over her. She was walking into a tempest, but for the first time in her life, she was walking away from her abusers. The journey took 4 grueling days. Coal dust clung to Abigail's hair, and her cheap wool dress was stifling in the unseasonable heat. When the train finally groaned to a halt at the Laramie Depot, the reality of her situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. The platform was chaotic, filled with ranchers, merchants, and soldiers. Abigail stepped down, clutching her bag so tightly, her knuckles turned white. She scanned the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs. She spotted him almost immediately. Harlan Cole was not the uncultured, desperate old man her sister had imagined. He stood a few inches over 6 feet, with broad shoulders encased in a well-tailored canvas duster. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with a face that was strikingly handsome, but hardened by years of sun and wind. A faded scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving his dark, piercing eyes an intimidating intensity. He radiated wealth, authority, and an uncompromising strength. In his large, leather-gloved hand, he held the delicate miniature portrait of Clara. He was looking for a petite, blonde angel in a silk traveling gown. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Abigail squared her shoulders. She would not cower. She walked straight toward him, her tall frame cutting through the crowd. When she stopped in front of him, Harlan looked right past her, his gaze still scanning the platform for the girl in the picture. "Mr. Cole," Abigail said. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. Harlan blinked, his dark eyes finally settling on her. He took in her height, her plain, dust-covered dress, and the stark, wine-colored mark on her cheek. Confusion flickered in his eyes, followed quickly by a dangerous spark of realization. "Who are you?" His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. "Where is Clara Higgins?" "Clara is in Missouri," Abigail said, maintaining eye contact despite the urge to look away. "I am Abigail, Clara's older sister." Harlan's jaw tightened. He looked down at the portrait of the blonde beauty, then back up at the scarred, imposing woman standing before him. The cruel joke became evident to him in a matter of seconds. His expression darkened into a mask of pure fury. He took a step forward, towering over her, his presence suffocating. "Is this some kind of swindle?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper so as not to attract a crowd. "I sent $300 for the woman in this picture. Did your family think they could steal my money and send me the... He stopped himself, but the implication hung heavy in the dry air. "The ugly daughter?" Abigail finished for him, lifting her chin defiantly. "Yes, that is exactly what they thought. They used your money to pay off my father's debts. My stepmother thought it would be highly amusing to send me in Clara's stead." A grand joke on the wealthy Wyoming rancher. Harlan stared at her, stunned by her bluntness. He expected tears, apologies, or hysterics. He did not expect this scarred woman to look him dead in the eye and lay out the bitter truth without a flinch. "And you went along with this?" he asked, his anger morphing into a cold, calculating scrutiny. "I was given a choice between boarding this train or freezing on the streets of St. Joseph," Abigail replied, her tone fiercely practical. "I am perfectly aware that I am not what you paid for, Mr. Cole. I know I am not beautiful. You have every right to put me on the next train back east, and I will find my own way from there, but I will not apologize for my family's sins. I am a hard worker. I can cook, I can mend, I can keep ledgers. I am worth my keep, even if I am not worth your affection." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the hissing of the train engine and the distant shouts of baggage handlers. Harlan studied her face. He saw the harshness of the birthmark, yes, but he also saw the intelligence in her sharp gray eyes. He looked down at her hands, They weren't the soft manicured hands of a parlor girl. They were calloused and capable. Slowly, Harlan reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a stack of letters, the letters Abigail had written. In the letter dated April 14th, Harlan said slowly, the writer stated that she believed a marriage in the West shouldn't be built on pretty words, but on the willingness to stand shoulder to shoulder when the winter storms hit. Who wrote those words? Abigail felt a sudden tightness in her throat. I did, she whispered. Clara didn't have the patience to write. She merely copied my drafts. Harlan looked from the letters to Abigail. A profound shift occurred in his dark eyes. The fury ebbed away, replaced by something entirely different. A deep, resonant chuckle suddenly erupted from his chest, startling Abigail. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was a laugh of genuine disbelief and cynical amusement. Your stepmother thought she was playing a joke on me, Harlan said, slipping the letters and the portrait back into his coat. She thought she was cheating me out of a fragile, useless porcelain doll who would have perished in her first Wyoming winter. He reached out and, to Abigail's utter shock, took her heavy carpetbag from her hands. Mr. Cole, she asked, bewildered. The name is Harlan, he said, turning toward the dirt road where a sturdy buckboard wagon and 2 massive draft horses waited. And it seems the joke is on them, Abigail. Because they sent me exactly what I was looking for. Come along. Whispering Pines is a 4-hour ride, and we have a wedding to plan. Abigail stood frozen for a second, her mind reeling. He wasn't sending her back. He wasn't rejecting her. Gathering her skirts, she hurried after him. As he helped her up into the wagon, his large hands gripping her waist with surprising gentleness, the tension between them crackled. They were 2 strangers, bound by a fraudulent contract, both carrying deep scars. As Harlan snapped the reins and the horses surged forward into the vast golden expanse of the Wyoming territory, Abigail knew the real test was just beginning. The cruel joke had brought her to the altar, but surviving the rugged West and uncovering the guarded heart of her new husband would demand every ounce of strength she possessed. Whispering Pines was not merely a ranch. It was a fortress carved into the unforgiving landscape of the Laramie Plains, nestled against the winding, frigid waters of the Medicine Bow River. As the buckboard wagon rattled onto the property, Abigail beheld a sprawling empire of timber and stone. Hundreds of cattle dotted the horizon, guarded by hardened men who rode with the discipline of a military unit. It didn't take Abigail long to realize why. Harlan Cole was not just a cattle baron. He was a former captain in the Union cavalry who had served under General Philip Sheridan. The faded scar through his eyebrow was a brutal souvenir from a Confederate saber at the Battle of Yellow Tavern. Harlan ran his ranch with tactical precision, demanding loyalty, hard work, and zero deceit. The irony that he had been subjected to the Higgins family's fraudulent marriage scheme was not lost on Abigail. Yet, instead of casting her out, he had recognized a fellow survivor in her stoic demeanor. Their marriage, hastily finalized by a traveling circuit judge the day after her arrival, was initially an alliance of convenience. They slept in separate rooms in the massive, drafty ranch house. Abigail, however, refused to be a passive guest. Within a week, she uncovered a massive discrepancy in the ranch's ledgers. Combining the mathematical skills she had honed under her father's roof with a sharp, tactical mind, she discovered that the ranch foreman, a gruff man named Jebediah, had been skimming profits from the Denver cattle shipments. When Abigail presented the meticulously corrected ledgers to Harlan, laying out the undeniable proof of the theft, the rancher's dark eyes widened. He immediately dismissed the foreman, saving the ranch thousands of dollars. That evening, as they sat by the roaring hearth, Harlan poured her a glass of Kentucky bourbon, a silent but profound gesture of respect. "You have the mind of a quartermaster, Abigail," Harlan rumbled, staring into the flames. "Your stepmother called you a burden. I call you a godsend." But it was 3 weeks later that Abigail truly secured her place at Whispering Pines, proving she possessed skills far beyond arithmetic. A sudden, violent spring blizzard swept down from the snowy peaks, catching a herd of yearlings in the lower valley. In the chaotic effort to drive the cattle to safety, a young ranch hand named Caleb was viciously gored in the thigh by a panicked longhorn. The men dragged him into the kitchen, leaving a trail of crimson across the oak floorboards. Caleb was pale, shivering violently, and losing a catastrophic amount of blood. "Saddle my fastest horse," Harlan roared at the remaining men. "I'll ride for Laramie and fetch Dr. Barnes. Keep pressure on that leg." "He won't survive a 4-hour wait, Harlan," Abigail shouted over the din, stripping off her apron. Back in street, Joseph, while Clara attended tea parties, Abigail had secretly earned extra coppers by assisting the local surgeon, scrubbing his instruments and absorbing every ounce of medical knowledge she could. "Get me boiling water, carbolic acid, and the strongest silk thread you have," Abigail commanded, her voice slicing through the panic with absolute authority. Harlan froze, looking at his new wife. Her gray eyes were completely devoid of fear. She wasn't a fragile lady swooning at the sight of gore. She was a soldier stepping onto the battlefield. "Do as she says," Harlan barked at the men, moving immediately to assist her. For the next 2 hours, the kitchen became a trauma ward. Abigail worked with breathtaking efficiency. She instructed Harlan on how to clamp the severed artery, while she thoroughly irrigated the massive wound, her hands steady, her focus absolute. She sutured the torn muscle and flesh with the precision of a combat medic. When it was finally over, Caleb was resting peacefully. The bleeding entirely stopped, and the wound professionally bound. Harlan stood at the wash basin, scrubbing the blood from his hands. He looked at Abigail, who was exhausted, her hair falling out of its pins, a smudge of soot on her forehead. He walked over to her, his large frame blocking out the light from the lantern. Slowly, gently, he reached out. His calloused thumb brushed against her cheek, tracing the edge of the wine-colored birthmark her family had so deeply despised. "They called you ugly," Harlan whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that shook the very foundations of his stoic heart. "They are blind fools. You are the most beautiful, formidable creature I have ever laid eyes upon." For the first time in her 24 years, Abigail felt tears prick her eyes. He didn't see a scar. He saw her. He saw the strength she had forged in the fires of her family's cruelty. When he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss tasting of sweat, bourbon, and a fierce, unyielding devotion, the contract of convenience shattered, replaced by a profound, unbreakable bond. 14 months later, the relentless wheel of fate turned, bringing a brutal reckoning to St. Joseph, Missouri. Josiah Higgins' hardware business finally collapsed under the weight of his incompetence and Martha's unchecked vanity. When the Buchanan County Bank, managed by the ruthless Elias Reed, initiated foreclosure proceedings, the final blow was struck. Elias's son, realizing Clara brought no dowry and a mountain of debt, unceremoniously broke their engagement. Overnight, the golden child and her haughty mother became social pariahs, evicted from their grand home and left with nothing but the clothes in their trunks. Desperate, starving, and possessing a toxic blend of arrogance and delusion, Martha formulated a plan. She remembered the $300 Harlan Cole had wired. She reasoned that if the ugly daughter had somehow managed to survive out west as a scullery maid or a miserable outcast, they could simply arrive in Wyoming, assert their familial authority, and demand money from the rancher to save them. If Harlan threw them out, Clara could surely bat her eyelashes and seduce one of the wealthy, uncultured cattlemen in Laramie. They pawned the last of Josiah's silver to purchase 2 train tickets on the Union Pacific Line. When Martha and Clara arrived at the Laramie depot, they were exhausted and covered in grime, a stark contrast to the elegant ladies they once pretended to be. They spent their very last dollars hiring a local driver to take them out to Whispering Pines. As the buggy crested the ridge overlooking the valley, Martha and Clara gasped. The ranch was magnificent, a bustling settlement of prosperity. "You see, Clara," Martha said, adjusting her frayed hat, a wicked gleam in her eye. "Mr. Cole is richer than we imagined. We will tell him Abigail is deranged and needs her family. We will move into the main house, and you will finally have the life you deserve." The buggy pulled to a halt in the main courtyard. A dozen ranch hands paused their work, eyeing the newcomers with suspicion. Martha stepped down, dusting off her skirts, and approached a massive, broad-shouldered man, inspecting a line of new Appaloosa horses. It was Harlan. "Mr. Cole!" Martha called out, plastering on a sickly sweet smile. "I am Martha Higgins. This is your sister-in-law, Clara. We have traveled through great peril to check on poor dear Abigail. I imagine she is struggling terribly out here. We've come to relieve you of the burden." Harlan turned slowly. His dark eyes swept over the two women, recognizing the golden-haired girl from the miniature portrait that still sat in his desk drawer as a reminder of the deception. His expression remained utterly unreadable, as cold and hard as Wyoming granite. "You're mistaken, Mrs. Higgins," Harlan rumbled, stepping toward them. "There are no burdens at Whispering Pines." Before Martha could respond, the heavy oak doors of the main ranch house opened. A woman stepped out onto the expansive wraparound porch. Clara's jaw dropped. Martha took a staggering step backward, all color draining from her face. It was Abigail, but she was unrecognizable from the cowering, ragged servant they had exiled. Abigail stood tall, her posture radiating absolute authority and grace. She wore a beautifully tailored riding habit of rich indigo wool that complemented her striking gray eyes. The birthmark on her cheek was visible, yet it no longer looked like a flaw. Framed by her confident bearing, it looked like the mark of a queen. At her side was an enormous, fiercely loyal timber wolf dog she had rescued and tamed over the harsh winter. "Abigail?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling with shock and a sudden, sharp pang of intense jealousy. Abigail walked down the porch steps, the wolf dog at her heels. She came to stand beside Harlan, who immediately placed a protective, possessive hand on the small of her back. The physical connection between them was palpable, a united, impenetrable front. "Hello, Martha." "Clara," Abigail said. Her voice was calm, holding none of the anger or fear they had expected. "To what do we owe this unexpected visit?" Martha, scrambling to salvage her plan, forced a laugh. "Abigail, darling, we missed you terribly. Things have been so dreadful in Missouri. The bank, the betrayal. We came to you. We are family, after all. We need a place to stay, just until we get back on our feet. A small allowance from your husband would suffice." Abigail looked at the women who had treated her worse than a stray dog for 2 decades. She thought of the cold nights scrubbing their floors, the cruel jests about her face, the way they had sold her off to a stranger as a malicious joke. She turned her gaze to Harlan. He looked down at her, his eyes softening only for her, silently offering her the absolute power to decide their fate. This was her kingdom, now. "Family?" Abigail repeated the word as if tasting something foul. She looked back at her stepmother. "My family is right here," she said, resting her hand on Harlan's chest. "You are strangers to me. Strangers who committed wire fraud and sold a woman they despised into the wilderness." "Abigail, you can't be serious," Clara cried out, stepping forward, her mask of superiority completely shattered. "We have nothing. We will starve." "You will learn to work," Abigail replied coldly, "just as you forced me to do. There is a boarding house in Laramie that needs laundresses. I suggest you inquire there." "You ungrateful wretch," Martha shrieked, losing her temper, her face turning an ugly shade of red. "We saved you from becoming a spinster. You owe us everything." "Mr. Cole, you cannot allow your wife to treat her mother this way." Harlan's demeanor shifted from cold to dangerously lethal. He took a step forward, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the 2 terrified women from Missouri. "Mrs. Higgins." Harlan's voice was a low, terrifying growl that echoed across the quiet courtyard. "The woman standing beside me is the matriarch of Whispering Pines. She is the finest medic, the sharpest mind, and the bravest soul I have ever known. You sent her here as a joke, but the joke, madam, was on you. You handed me a diamond, thinking it was a rock, and now you are trespassing on her land." Harlan gestured to 2 of his armed ranch hands. "Escort these women back to Laramie. If they set foot on Whispering Pines land again, they will be arrested for the wire fraud they committed last spring. I still have the telegrams." Martha began to sob hysterically, dragging Clara by the arm as the ranch hands ushered them back to the buggy. Clara looked back one last time, her tear-streaked face contorted with the bitter realization of what she had thrown away. She had thought she was avoiding a miserable fate. Instead, She had given away an empire. Abigail stood perfectly still as the buggy disappeared back over the ridge, taking the last ghosts of her past with it. The wind howled through the pines, a wild, victorious sound. Harlan wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his broad chest, burying his face in her hair. "Are you all right, Mrs. Cole?" he murmured. Abigail leaned into his embrace, looking out over the vast, beautiful, untamed land that she now called home. She touched the scar on her cheek, smiling as a profound sense of peace washed over her. "I have never been better, Mr. Cole," she replied softly. "Never better." The ugly daughter had been cast into the fire to burn. Instead, she had forged a crown. Do you love a story of sweet revenge and true love triumphing over cruelty? Hit that like button if you cheered for Abigail's ultimate victory. Share this dramatic Wild West tale with your friends who love a brilliant plot twist and an underdog who rises to the top. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more epic, full-length historical romance dramas and thrilling stories delivered straight to you every week. Let me know your favorite part in the comments below.